In 1905, the psychologist Stanley Halls published his monumental study, Adolescence. In this study, he described a period in young people's development where they were forging their own identities, forging this often through struggles with authority figures, parents, teachers, and so forth. Hall's work was highly influential in encouraging societies across the Western world to set up high schooling, although this would not be achieved as a compulsory measure until the 1930s. He presented adolescence as a universal stage in human development, one that all young people had to pass through. However, what Hall was actually picking up on was a significant social and cultural change that was occurring in his time. Not that long before he was writing, young people passed into adulthood around the ages of 12 or 13. And so what he was picking up on was a gradual extension of the age of youth further up the age scale. Not that long before that, children as young as 6 or 7 were regularly found working in factories, in mines, as street vendors, or as domestic labourers. In the mid-1800s, there were a raft of labour law reforms that restricted the type of work that children were allowed to perform, and which eventually had them removed from the workforce altogether. In principle, in the early 1900s, many working class children were leaving school to go to work during certain times of the year. What was also happening around this period was a gradual extension of the rather sentimental view of childhood that was held initially by the middle classes, the idea that the child was innocent and vulnerable. In 1962, the French historian Philippe Eyres published his Centuries of Childhood. In this, he made the provocative claim that in the medieval period, in the 1400s, childhood, at least as we know it, didn't exist at all. Young people around the age of 7 would be thrown into the adult world. If you were poor, you would be sent off to work, you would be apprenticed. If you were wealthy, you would be basically told to grow up. You would be weaned of affection if you were a male, and preparations would be made to marry you if you were female. In the 1600s, things started to change, according to Eyres, and the distinction between adulthood and childhood started to be acknowledged. And it was really only in the 1700s that an idea of childhood similar to our own started to emerge, along with children's literature, toys, distinctive clothing, and so forth. Now, some scholars have challenged Eyres' more excessive claims, especially those concerning the brutal treatment of young people in the Middle Ages, or the failure of parents to mourn the death of a child. Nevertheless, in the early 1800s, children as young as 8 or 9 were considered to be little adults. They would regularly work and play, including gambling and drinking and dancing, alongside adults. And it was really only in the middle of the 1800s, around 1850, that the concept of childhood that applied in the middle class world got extended to working class children. This coincided with the push to establish a system of mass compulsory primary schooling, one in which all children would have to attend. Just as the concept of adolescence coincided with the push to establish a mass compulsory system of high schooling.